back to the channel. Today I wanted to make a video that kind of talks about the kind of privacy spectrum. I think everybody kind of has a different definition of privacy and like what it means to them. People kind of have different experiences, different professions. They work in different industries. Maybe they're a public figure. All of those things kind of play into what people's thoughts are about internet privacy. So one person might be super paranoid about using the internet because they're afraid that their information could be compromised, while some other person might be totally fine with using all apps on their phone, totally comfortable with any website out there. It really just kind of depends on the person. I think most people obviously fall somewhere in the middle. I'm, interested in privacy, yet I still think I'm, somewhat in the middle when it comes to like how I feel about certain tools and if they're necessary, and then certain services that either focus on privacy or don't focus on privacy at all. But there really is a kind of continuum, a spectrum of, super lax, very almost like irresponsible with information online, and that person doesn't care about privacy very much, all the way to super paranoid, like, avoids using the internet. And when he or she does use the internet, they're using things like VPNs or Tor to access the internet. And then they're using alternative tools to kind of the mainstream options. So they're not using Google for their search engine. They're using something like DuckDuckGo or Startpage. They're likely using an encrypted email provider. They're likely using an encrypted messaging service like Signal. And, they might have other software installed on their router that kind of redirects all of their traffic through another IP address, so that even if someone is able to track them online, they're not able to track them down to their individual IP address. And so I guess I can kind of start with what it looks like if you're kind of on the fast and loose end of the spectrum. This is a person probably pretty young, because as someone who's grown up with the internet myself, I'm pretty comfortable using most services, most apps. But this person, if they're asked permission to allow Google to track them, or Apple to track them, or any website to track them, they just click allow. They don't even read the terms of service. They don't really even care if the website's reputable or not. They just say allow tracking. They're willing to share information. Sometimes this is detrimental, because if someone reaches out to them on Facebook and asks for information and they think that it's their cousin or their grandma or something, and then later they find out that it was someone posing as that person, obviously that can cause some issues. Say if someone asked for banking information, or just send them a quick message like, hey, can you give me your social security number? I need it for something, some reason. And then they share it because they really don't care. They don't see the threat of sharing that information. And this can lead to kind of negative outcomes if you're sharing your financial information with someone who isn't who they say they are. Kind of a number of different things that could happen there. I know sometimes you'll get emails that look like they're from Google or Amazon or something, but they're actually phishing emails, and they're trying to get your login information or your credit card information or something. And if you're not kind of savvy to these things, which is kind of contradictory here, because if you're a younger person and you've been using the internet a lot and that's why you're comfortable, odds are you're going to be more tuned into these things, and things are going to stand out. The email address, who it's from, is not quite who it says it is. Or maybe the header image in some email newsletter that looks like it's from Google or Amazon is actually from, just some random Gmail account. That's one thing to look out for. But for these young people, if they're using, 100 apps a day, which is ridiculously high. I don't know if anybody's actually doing that, but they have so many touch points on the internet that even if one is compromised, or even if they're lax in their privacy practices on one app, or they share the wrong information on one of these channels, it can still have negative consequences for them down the road, or even right away. If it's something like sharing financial information, could harm their financial situation, could wreck their credit score if someone's able to open credit cards or something under their identity. So that's one thing to look out for. I think a little bit closer to the middle from that would be kind of your average internet user. This is someone who's pretty tech savvy. I'd say they use the internet most days, and I think people in most jobs today are using the internet at least at some point throughout their day. So these people are pretty aware of certain threats online, but they might just not have the same comfort level as someone at the far end of the spectrum. So they might take precautions like using strong passwords, for example, whereas the person on the end of the spectrum would not even care. They'd use password one for every password that they have online. I think, especially people working in jobs, like if you're in a enterprise company, there's going to be security kind of standards set for you as far as what you can use as your password, if you can repeat the same password, all these things. So that's another thing to think of. If you're in an enterprise job, odds are you've been exposed to some sort of cybersecurity training or anti-phishing training or something. So yeah, that's one thing to consider when kind of looking at this range. If you're using the internet for work, odds are your company wants to keep all of their information safe too. And if your company collects user data, they don't want you to be the person who leaks that information to either a competitor or to a nefarious actor. So yeah, like those people working in those jobs will likely have at least some awareness. And I think that's kind of where this middle lies, is like, if you're on the far end and you don't care at all, odds are it's because you haven't been exposed to information about internet privacy. You haven't, looked into the ways that companies like Facebook and Google use your information. Or, maybe you have and you just don't care, and whatever, if that's you, that's fine. But I think as you kind of lean into this a little more, one, it is easy to get kind of paranoid because you just assume that every website has trackers on it, and then you're going to get an ad for whatever you look at later, or the company's going to sell your data to a third party and they're going to use that information kind of against you. And that can be kind of unsettling if you're not used to it, because that's when you get things like display ads that are directly related to conversations you had because you were looking something up on Google or something. And if that's the case, as soon as you notice that, I think it's a little easier to be like, oh, okay, I understand why privacy might be a little more important. And then kind of as we work our way towards like the super internet privacy nut, you get kind of the people who have seen this and they have looked into the implications of sharing their data and just openly allowing companies like Google or Facebook to just do whatever they want with their information. They're noticing that when they do those things, it's giving a lot of power to big corporations like Facebook and Google to kind of control kind of your exposure to information, but then also like the actions that you take. Because if you're consistently listening to the same people over and over again, you kind of allow yourself to go down that rabbit hole, and the algorithm continues to serve you content based on your interests. And the more information about your interests that these companies have, the more specific that targeting can be. So if they're able to see that you listen to a certain podcast where people were discussing, um, you know, abortion rights or something, well, then they can continue to serve you more extreme information, drive you down a crazy path, and then eventually can influence you to purchase products, to consume different media. Um, and yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, if you're using Google for your email, for your maps, for your um, instant messaging, all that stuff, um, you're kind of leaving the door open to allow them to influence you in some way. Um, just because if they're able to track your location, then that means they can serve you more contextual ads. If you allow them to kind of scan through your email and see what you're interested in there, that gives Google at least an open door to potentially influence you. Um, and we don't really think of these things, but let's say you're going looking for a restaurant to eat at. Well, if you're using Google Maps, you're relying on Google to show up, show the best restaurant near you or show the number one restaurant. And that's giving Google the power to influence your choices. So relying on these tools and their algorithms is fine. It's definitely convenient, but it's opening you up to um, like just being influenced totally by these big platforms. And then I think kind of working our way more paranoid or whatever is maybe someone who works in politics or is a public figure. Um, this person is obviously concerned about keeping their online footprint pretty private, because if they don't, that could harm their reputation or their ability to be reelected, or could give their opponents a leg up on them or something. And that's kind of an issue too. I mean, if the president of the United States has sensitive information on his phone or something, and a foreign government is able to access that, obviously that's a national security interest. So a public figure like the president or like a celebrity obviously needs to take further steps to protect their online information and their footprint on the internet, to prevent news organizations from sharing that information, to prevent hackers or whatever from stealing that and harming them. And there's kind of a number of ways they can do that. They can use a VPN to avoid any kind of man-in-the-middle attacks. They can avoid public Wi-Fi networks, and they can avoid clicking on random links they get texted or emailed. There are a number of vulnerabilities, and unfortunately, kind of as we develop new technology to avoid these vulnerabilities, the people behind them are just getting better at creating new ones that are harder to detect and harder to avoid. So I think kind of my main point here is that you just have to figure out where on that spectrum you fall, whether you don't really care about privacy and your information's totally public and cool, or you care very much about what information someone could potentially access from you or about you online. And in the event that you're, super far on that end where you really are kind of nervous about using the internet, there are a number of tools you can use. I'd recommend a private search engine. I'd recommend an encrypted messenger like Signal. I'd recommend a VPN like NordVPN. I'd recommend, potentially using Tor. If it's super sensitive stuff that you're browsing, like use Tor, because even though it's a little less convenient than just using a standard browser, at the end of the day, it's going to keep you safer. And then, yeah, like there's just kind of some basic ground rules, like don't don't share information that you don't want public online. Like that's rule number one. Um, and then don't connect to public networks because you don't know what's going on with the network itself. So if you're at a coffee shop, um, it's hard to know what the security protocols are that the network has in place. So I would avoid connecting to that altogether because you're just opening yourself up to potential attacks or someone kind of accessing or monitoring your activity at least. Um, yeah, so that's just kind of what I wanted to chat through. Thank you guys for tuning in, and yeah, I'll talk to you all soon.